So Sargon recently debated with his talk show host Michael Brooks regarding whether there is such a thing as the regressive left, which also extended into whether the hashtag regressive left is justified. The debate is frankly infuriating, mostly because both of them are pretty much talking about completely different things. They're not on the same wavelength at all at any point in this debate. And both just insist upon the other person to play their game of question asking. However, I would say that I tend to side with Sargon a little bit more on the subject matter, even though I think he could have done a better job at debating this person. And I just want to give my thoughts on the matter.
But just a note here, we're still going off and the wheels are coming off. You have not defined in any serious way regressive left or explained what connects me, Ezra, and Glenn.
Michael Brooks wants a definition of the regressive left, which it's true he never got from Sargon, which I think he should have. So I'm going to give him one. The regressive lefts are generally people who identify themselves as either liberals, progressives, freethinkers, skeptics, who generally support socialist policies over libertarian ones, but who are actually following a certain ideological narrative religiously and are regressed by certain ideology from truly becoming what they say they are, which they're not. In the current contemporary times, there are two big ones that have this ideological narrative, and these are race and gender, both of which are really under one big umbrella ideology, which is that there are groups of people who are identified as historically underprivileged and marginalized. Therefore, these people must be reparated, compensated, and preferred at all costs and generally speaking at all times over those who are identified as privileged and therefore the oppressors. And these regressives generally have their regressivism manifested when they voice, behave, and advocate for policies that reflects a certain blatant double standard, so obvious in their face that they must be retarded to not see it in front of them. But they're not retarded. It's just because of the ideological narrative that they must follow. So their thinking must be restricted to that narrative. And that's what makes them regressive. Now, by this definition, Michael Brooks is not necessarily a regressive left. I wasn't clear about it from what he said. It sounds that he simply looks at things a different way, which as a result is not seeing the bigger picture as he supposedly claims that he is. But that doesn't by itself necessarily makes him a regressive left by this definition, because his position could very well not be stemmed from an ideology per se, just not being wise enough with the information that he has. For example, he said this about the Black History Month.
I'm glad to hear it.
I think Black History Month is a pretty obvious thing, and I'm actually curious now. I am joking because it's not something I give much thought, but I think it's pretty obvious something that should be honored in American history. What would be your
I
problem
agree.
with
I
Black history?
totally agree that Black history should be honored in American history.
Okay, so what's your problem with Black History Month?
Well, why would you need a separate month for that? Shouldn't every month be Black History Month and White History Month? Shouldn't both histories be taught as an accurate representation of what happened in your country's history, instead of singling out a specific month for black people?
Well, first of all, I don't know what your point is. It's not like Black history is not taught the rest of the months of the year.
Okay,
The
well,
whole
why do you need
point
Black History
is
Month then?
Because you have a group of people that have been historically radically repressed, had their contributions not acknowledged in American history books, and it just says, look,
okay, but
let's
you're
put a
doing that
specific spotlight on something. That's
Okay,
not
but-
that complicated. Yes, I disagree with you. I'm not a fanatical, pure individualist. Yes.
No,
Again,
I'm not
not
talking
a
about
gotcha.
individualism. I'm talking about the need to have a separate month for Black history if, as you say, Black history is being taught as part of the mainstream curriculum to give an accurate representation of your country's history. There is no
needs to be
need to then
taught
have a
all of
separate
the
Black
above.
History Month, right?
All of the above. All of the above. Again, all of the above. These are not either-or questions, again.
Can I ask you a question about Black History Month, then? I take it you're in support of the idea of a Black History Month. Why not have an Native American History Month?
We certainly should.
Oh, right. Okay,
Absolutely.
so we haven't gone far enough. What about a Women's History Month?
Throw it on the docket.
Notice here that he said that all of the above, that we should have Native American History Month and Women's History Month. Okay, Michael, just so you know, there are only 12 months in 1 year. By this logic of let's all give history months to those who have been historically oppressed in America, and I'm assuming that this includes oppression by European American colonialists before the Declaration of Independence, let's run down this list a bit. So we should obviously include the Jews. I think you might agree with that. So that's 4 months taken away. So it's Black, Jews, women, and Native Americans, right? We should include the Irish. They were the first slaves into America, actually. We should include the Chinese, the first of which were also slaves who were kidnapped to work on the railroads. In fact, they were cheaper than the black laborers. They were called the coolies, from the Chinese word coolie, literally hard labor. We should include the Japanese, who had to be put in a concentration camp in America during World War II. We should have the gays, obviously. Gays were oppressed in America. And then, of course, we should also have transgenders, too. And obviously, we should have Hispanics and Latinos who are currently being oppressed. Then, by Michael Brooks' own logic, we should also give a month to the Muslims because they're currently being oppressed in the United States and elsewhere. And then we should add the atheists. Atheists couldn't run for office, and they have to keep their atheism hidden for a while, and before that they were probably hanged during the Salem witch trial times. Oh, and I forgot, what about the pagans in the United States? They were oppressed just as much as the atheists, if not more. And I forgot about the Hawaiians. They were just as oppressed as the Native Americans for a while too. How about the disabled people? They were known to be oppressed. What about the gypsies? And then we can also have a subgroup of some of these. Surely we should give colored women, or black women, a month all for themselves. They must be the most oppressed group, right? Oh, I'm running out of months, haven't I? Well, at this point, somebody like Michael Brooks might say, well, there are some groups who are oppressed more than others historically. While I don't necessarily disagree with this, I have to say that one, according to Michael Brooks said, we have to look at history, right? Well, history is complicated. We can only state which policy is worse for which group than other groups. But even with that, in practice, they might be the same or different depending on the situation and many other factors. For example, just how much better were the Irish slaves treated compared to the black slaves in practice? Well, we don't know, but it could very well be that on the average or close to average, they were treated equally as bad. And two, I would really say that among all of these groups, women were probably the least oppressed. Because yes, even though they didn't have as many rights as men did, they also did not have as many responsibilities. They were treated like children, really. That's why you always have the phrase women and children together. And the women who had money really didn't need to do anything but go around and spending their husbands' or their father's money however and whenever they wished. They didn't even need to do the womanly duty of raising their own children, as they could delegate the responsibility of raising children to a nanny that they hire. So why are they being placed on top of almost everybody else right now? The point is this: ideas are intimately interweaved into history. When some bad and tragic historical event happens, such as slavery, we need to examine the idea behind slavery and why it's bad and why it's potentially bad for almost everyone. It's the same with segregation. And once we identify the bad idea, we can only progress by making laws and policies that counterfeit the bad idea. This is not being ahistorical. This is not only being historical, but assessing history objectively as possible and all-encompassing as possible, which includes everybody, not just one perspective, not just one group, but everybody, so that we can make laws and policies for the present and future that will benefit everybody. For example, why is segregation bad? Because it prefers one racial group over another, and therefore individuals suffer because of it. And when enough individuals suffer, society cannot move forward. So when you make any kind of decision to prefer one racial group over another, you are in effect doing the same thing. It's sort of like a race on a racetrack, right? So segregation, it's kind of like actively crippling a person based on the way he looks so that he cannot move nearly as fast as you. So you obviously win the race. But as of now, the left racial policy, it's akin to not only are you not allowed to cripple these people, which obviously that's good, but you are actually slowing down for them so they can win the race. And when they either cannot win the race, even though you do that, the immediate conclusion is that you have actually crippled them. Now I know at this point somebody like Michael Brooks would say, well, no, the person is still recovering from being crippled. So yes, you have to slow down for that person. Okay then, if that's the case, I'm going to ask, when should we compete fair and square? So when is the time when we can start doing that? How do I then know if that person is still crippled? If I'm not doing the crippling, how do I know? And why is my slowing down for him a good way instead of the alternative? For example, taking him to a rehabilitating center or offer other means of helping him if there really is a problem with his legs. And if there simply isn't, why shouldn't I win the race if I follow the fair rules? Which is, I only involve in training for myself. I never do anything to anybody else. I ran and then I win. Why then is that racism? So this is what's going on right now in America. Many times there are no proofs of real racism going on. There are individual racial preferences and racial heuristics, but that's not racism because it's not from racial laws or policies. And once we overcome the notion of race and focus on individuals, that is the best way and the best idea. We can improve these situations dramatically if we did that. That's the point that the regressive lefts are blockading. They are saying, if you don't show racial preference towards the identified marginalized groups, you are in effect racist. And trust me, I live down in the South where technically I am being oppressed from speaking about this in public. If I even discuss what my thoughts are on the matter with one indecent person who has some kind of power over me, he or she can report me to my employer, and I would either need to be quote-unquote re-educated, just like in communism, or I would need to be fired. And I would have absolutely no protection against that. Just the other day, I was forced to sit through a horrendous talk by this female black lecturer. I think she may also be a lesbian. Yeah, she's triple marginalized. I had to listen to her talk about literacy in the underprivileged, which of course in this case just means literacy problems among the blacks. And as I predicted, all she did was talking about herself and how oppressed her family was, and then proposed absolutely no solutions. Just more, we need to take history into account. All these policies are not taking history into account. Which nowadays simply translates into, black people don't need to have personal responsibilities because they are being oppressed. So if you implement something for them and they still fail somehow, that's always your problem, not theirs. which honestly is really racist towards the blacks, since it's like saying that they are not expected to have personal achievements and they need to be overprotected like children. Now just counter what she said with another person who happened to be a cisgender white male who found that actually the literacy gap between black and whites are closing, but the literacy gaps between poor and rich are enlarging. And the difference among these children was the fact that poor kids don't have access to books over the summer as much. So we should allow them to have more access to books by either book drives or letting them bring books from the school to their homes, or allowing for more easy access of a children's section in the library. These are actual solutions. But of course, this black lesbian woman would say to her oppressor, "Oh, but that's ahistorical. You're not taking history into account." I'm sorry, that's regressivism. How is history going to help, especially when you're not proposing anything concrete? But of course, I was not allowed to call her out on it, and I had to torturedly sift through the entire thing, because if I leave in the middle of her atrocious speech, I would have to come up with a good excuse, or I would be in trouble with the university. And if that's not oppression, I don't know what is. Now, all that being said, however, I do want to mention that I do kind of agree with Michael Brooks regarding what he said about the Muslims. I was labeled regressive left many times from the skeptic community if I just said that I find the following statements stupid and frankly bigoted, which is, Islam is full of savages, fuck all Muslims, and there can be no moderate Muslims. I'm sorry, if you cannot see how these statements are essentially bigoted and they would do more harm than good, then I think you're also a regressive. This is why I lost all respect I had for Sam Harris when he insisted in his interview with the Young Turk that Islam is the worst religion out of all the religions, and that terrorism can only truly be stemmed out of a violent religion like Islam, which is the primary cause. But of course, he couldn't support any of those statements with actual facts. He was essentially cherry-picking and choosing, as well as making double standards to other religions such as Christianity and Judaism. He, in that conversation, like Michael Brooks has said, did completely ignore any political, historical, social, economic factors. And yes, I've had encounterings in the atheist community that even if you bring these things up, if you bring these factors up, you will be called a regressive, even when you have clarified yourself by saying that no, you don't have a problem with criticizing Islam, just saying that be careful when you try to use the ideas in the religion to link to what's going on in the Middle East, which is more complicated than just some ideas from the practiced religion. And yes, that also includes not taking the polls that you get so lightly either way, because many times what people say that they believe about individual things and how they will end up behaving are not the same. Again, that doesn't mean that the things that they say that they believe cannot be problematic. So if you take those things in mind, then we can carry the conversation forward. And like I said in one of my videos, if there are Muslims who say stupid things, sure, you should criticize it. I advocate for a culture of criticisms. I mean, free criticism, obviously. You know, just like that Muslim woman doctor who whined about people being racist towards her, you should be able to call out her stupidity about it. But don't just automatically paint everybody in the same brush. Now, I know people like Sargon don't generally do that, and he might say, well, who does? Well, a lot of people, I can assure you. A lot of people I've encountered, even in the American Atheist Conference, who do that. I myself was in fact influenced by this kind of mindset for a period of time, and I actually now feel kind of ashamed that I used to be terrified of Muslims when I see one, because I thought that they would do harm to me. That's the power of propaganda and of this primitive mindset of you are either with us or you are against us, which people still to this day cannot get out of, whether you are on the left or you're on the right. And that is the problem with both the regressive left as well as the regressive right.